Well, I'm publishing on LinkedIn and nobody's buying. So what's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? Or my favorite, what's wrong with LinkedIn?
And what normally comes out of that, I might as well just not try.
LinkedIn doesn't work.
Yeah.
Nobody's buying.
Mm-hmm.
No one has budget. I'm a loser.
Yeah.
It's usually one of the following conclusions. Now, the good news today is possibly none of those things are true.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly LinkedIn works just fine. And possibly they are buying. And possibly they do have budgets. And possibly you're not a loser. Those are all very real possibilities. And we're going to explain to you why today, aren't we, Carrie?
We certainly are.
So the data we're going to share with you today is very interesting. It comes out of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for Marketing Science based out of Australia. Okay, currently affiliated with Adelaide University. And they've done a ton of research. Go to their website and check it out if you want. They've done a ton of research, a lot of it in B2C marketing, probably the majority of it from what I understand in B2C marketing. And we're going to share some of the findings today that have come out of their research in B2C marketing, B2C being business to consumer marketing science, if you will. And we're going to help you apply this to consulting because our belief here today is that the ideas that we're going to share, the research findings we're going to share are entirely applicable to consultants. And we'll share kind of the detailed notes of where it applies and how it applies. But here's the big idea. Let's start with the big idea. They talk about this concept of mental availability. The idea that when a specific challenge, problem, scenario comes up, we retrieve a solution. We retrieve a product. We retrieve a brand, if you will. So if you think about just some simple consumer-facing examples, when you think about car insurance, when you think about car insurance, something happens, there's an accident or your premium goes up or whatever it may be. There's certain trigger events or renewal that have you think about car insurance. What do people often think about? The ad they saw, the jingle that's in their head, right? The car insurance company that's managed to become the one that's retrieved in that particular instance. So if it's renewal, for example, and you're thinking I'm paying too much, you might retrieve or think about the car insurance brand that tied their proposition to price and savings, for example. Geico, right? 15 minutes may save you, blah, blah, blah. Or a drink. You're thirsty, it's afternoon slump, you're thirsty, you want a bit of a pick-me-up. That's where a lot of the drink market, like Coke or energy drinks, are trying to capitalize, right? Or maybe a snack or something like that. So these are examples of retrievals that we make for certainly consumer products all the time based on how we're feeling and the specific context or challenges that we're facing. The big idea here is this, applied to consultants. You need to own one of those triggers, what they call category entry points is like the technical term in consumer marketing. You need to own one of those entry points. You need to own a specific circumstance, a specific collection of circumstances, a specific point in time or problem or cue so that you can be recalled or retrieved when the client's in that particular situation.
And I think I want to stop there for a moment. I think that's a really important thing to highlight, which is this works when the client is in that particular situation, right? It's a little bit different than you're walking past the counter at the gas station to pay for your gas and you see the chocolate bar and you think, oh, that'd be nice, right? Because it costs, I don't know what a chocolate bar costs these days, $1 or something. And I'm just going to do that.
$1? What world do you live in?
I have no idea.
Bars don't cost $1 anymore.
What do chocolate bars cost?
I don't know, 2, 3. You go to a vending machine now, it's $3, $4 for a bag of chips.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's a topic for another day.
Fair. Mm-hmm. Next podcast, stand by. We'll talk about the price of snacks. But I think, the important thing is what we're talking about is someone recalling you, right? Your information. Oh, I should call Ahmed because I have this problem now. But it's going to happen when they feel the urgency of the problem. And I just think that's an important piece of framing to have around this, because it also goes back to what you said in the beginning, which is LinkedIn's not working. Nobody's calling. Nobody cares. Also, one of the reasons that isn't true is that it just so happens that there's a whole bunch of people who are, yes, gathering this information about you, right? They're understanding who you are, but they're not in that, moment of need, right? That buying pocket right now. So I think it's just, we talked about that a lot before, but I just want to put that out there as another frame around this, because what you're not trying to do, or maybe trying to do, but it's not going to be very successful, is convince someone they have a problem, right? What you are really relying on is connecting with them in a way that when they do have the problem, they do, as you're saying, remember who you are.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we had another episode at some point, probably recently, where we talked about how consulting is not an impulse purchase.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea that just because I find you or discover you right now, I'm all of a sudden now interested in buying from you is a ridiculous proposition. And we all make this assumption that, oh, well, I solved their problems. Why wouldn't they hire me right away? Well, there's all this context around their problem. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they're not there yet. Maybe they're gathering evidence. Maybe the pain isn't there. Maybe they're exploring other solutions. Maybe they're trying to build a business. Any number of reasons as to why, if they have the problem that you solve, which isn't everybody, they may not be ready to immediately hire you. So practically, when we understand how B2B buying decisions get made, there's a really good stat here also from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute on B2B. They call it the 95-5 rule. The 95-5 rule is that at any given point in time, 5% of your market is actively looking to buy something. Mm-hmm. 5% of your market is actively looking for a solution. The remaining 95% are not yet ready to buy. Now, some of them might be close, right? So it's dynamic, right? There's always new entrants entering the 5% of buyers. So another 10, 15, 20% might be close, might be getting there, might be earlier stage, and will enter the 5%. When we understand this, then this idea of retrieval becomes so much more important, because the deals that are closed fast are in the 5%, and those are few. And you need to do a certain amount of volume of outreach or awareness gathering to find the 5% that are going to buy fairly soon. Everybody else isn't quite there yet. Your goal, therefore, becomes not to convert everybody, because you're not going to convert everybody. Your goal becomes to, convert the 5% if you can get in front of them, but also, I call this, this is my language now, I call this creating a box in their mind. This idea that give them a place to file you away in their brain, right? Put you in a box, label the box. What's that box? That's your category. And you want to hopefully be the first name in that category, because you want to create a new category, which is another conversation altogether. But the idea that you wedge yourself in their minds and the minds of the 95%, not once, but then continuously via your thought leadership, marketing, communications, etc., such that you reinforce in their minds that when they're there, when they're ready, when they want to buy something, look for a solution actively, you become the first person that they call. And first is important, as I think we've talked about in previous episodes, this notion that there's typically in a consulting purchase, there's a front runner. There's somebody that they thought of first, who set the criteria, and that front runner wins the deal. I forget the exact number, but it was something like 80% plus of the time.
Yeah, and this also, I think, hopefully creates a bit of a mindset shift as well around, we'll often hear, we're talking to clients and we'll hear them say, well, the first thing that we're talking about, which is I'm putting my information out there into the void, right? I'm doing this outreach, I'm creating this content, it's just sort of landing in a black hole. Or I'm connecting with people and they're not buyers. Therefore, and this is the dangerous thing, therefore it's a waste of my time. And what we're talking about here is the fact that it's not a waste of your time, because what it's doing is setting into motion this, future ability to pull you out of the box in their brain. And so it may feel like you're not being effective if you're not always, immediately connecting with the buyer. That is not true. What you're really doing is, creating that recognition, creating that ability to be retrieved at a later date. And the reality is that, you know the problem you're solving. And so you also know what subset of people is likely to have that problem in the future, right? So you can still be selective about who you're connecting with, who you're marketing to. You're not just sort of sending out a broad message to everybody. That niching down of who the appropriate, the ideal client is still important. It's just recognizing that it might be that they need you in 3 months or 6 months or a year versus needing you today.
Which has all kinds of very important and interesting and fascinating consequences. Among them are that you should have been building pipeline for the past 6 months. Right? If we accept this premise that consulting is not an impulse purchase, that 5% of the market's in a buying position, 95% isn't quite there right now, but they might be there in the future, and that therefore sales cycles are what they are. They're going to vary by market and price point, et cetera, but there is a sales cycle and it does take time. And while we can influence the sales cycle, we can't control the sales cycle. There's amount of time that it takes for someone to reach out, want to have a conversation with you. And as we discussed previously, that's typically when they've more than halfway made up their mind. Somewhere in the range of 60 to 70% through the buying process is when they're actually willing to talk to you. So therefore, if you're not wedging yourself in the prospect's mind sooner, it's going to take time, assuming consistency on your part, for them to reach out to you. So this is the problem with, okay, well, it's beginning of August right now when this goes live, probably roughly. And, I need clients now. So I'm going to start prospecting now. Well, yes, that's possible that you might get clients now if you reach that pocket of 5%, sure. But what's much more likely is that you're not going to get clients until Q4, Q1 of next year. Had you started 6 months ago, then more of your market would have been at a place now where they're ready to retrieve you, take you out of that mental box.
Yeah, and that can be a depressing realization. But I think the more optimistic view is once you get this rolling, right? Once you're out there, once you have really cemented your name to a particular problem or a particular solution, this all becomes easier. And, if we're talking to you now and you're someone who needs a client now and hasn't started building your pipeline, then yeah, it might feel painful for a moment, and that's fair. But once you get this rolling and once you are continually out there and once you have sort of the power of, people talking to each other and, your ongoing content that's just out living in the world that people can see on a regular basis, once all that exists, it starts to kind of happen in the background, right? It starts to be something that is just occurring day to day that then starts to put you in the place where people just start calling, which is a much different position than, you're in when you're at the beginning of building this up. And so I think it's important to recognize that, yes, there's work to be done, but once you're in that groove and once you have really made that name for yourself, things become much simpler.
Yeah, it's like they say the best time to plant a tree was yesterday.
Yeah.
The second best time was today, right? So yeah, it's uncomfortable if you're in a place where, if you're listening to this, you're one of two positions. I can confidently say this, right? Either you need new business now, and all of this is very uncomfortable to you, which I get. And there are ways to drive new business now, and that's not the topic of today's episode, but there are strategies to reach the 5% of active buyers, certainly. Now, in your attempt to reach that 5% of buyers, you should also be thinking about, how do I get the 95% to remember who I am in 3, 6, 9, 12 months so that you're not in this position again in the future. So yes, you might kick yourself for not having, built pipeline already and haven't been actively engaging in prospecting for the past 6 to 12 months. But if anything, that should motivate you to start doing it today, while obviously solving for your more immediate revenue problems. And if you're in a place where, well, I don't need the business today, I'm at capacity, great. This is the time. This is the time to start prospecting from a position of strength so that in 6 to 12 months or whatever it may be, when you do have capacity, when you do want to grow, when you are looking for new clients, when one of your current clients decides to exit, you have a pool of people that already know who you are and can retrieve you when they're ready.
Yeah. And the other thing that's maybe worth talking about here is, what do we mean by pipeline, right? Because there are folks that would say, well, I've got this huge, my CRM is full of names, right? Therefore, I have a big pipeline. And if you think about what we're talking about today, that's not true, right? Just because you've connected with people doesn't mean they are going to remember you, think of you, retrieve your name when they need you. And so this is also where it's really important to think about, like, what do you mean by pipeline? What does a quality pipeline look like? Not just a volume of people in a pipeline. Because in the end, you could have connected with 100,000 people over the last year. And if nobody remembers you, nobody thinks of you, you might as well have, not one name on that list.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I kind of think of it in two parts. There's the invisible pipeline and the visible pipeline. And we've spoken about this a little bit in the past. The invisible pipeline is the people in the first half of their buyer's journey who are consuming information, following your content, paying attention to you. This assumes that you're publishing. Obviously, if you're not publishing, then there's nothing to follow or pay attention to. And they're not contacting you. They're not saying anything. They're not booking a meeting. They're not messaging you because they're not there yet. They're still being nurtured. They're in your invisible pipeline. You are nurturing them via your marketing activity and your content and communications, but they're not messaging and they're not booking meetings. They're not raising their hand yet. So you can't see them, but they can see you. Okay. If you're doing this right, that is, right? Yeah. This requires the whole scaffolding of a prospecting engine that if you don't have, then that's the first problem. And then there's the visible pipeline. They raise their hand, they send a message, they book a meeting, you have a conversation. Now you know who they are, they know who you are, you've had some kind of an exchange. Maybe they're ready, maybe they're not ready. There's all kinds of stages within that, right? Now, people tend to focus on the visible pipeline, and that's important. There should be a visible pipeline. There should be some names in there that you know of, that you're talking to, that you're nurturing. But if you're doing the right things, there's a larger invisible pipeline of people that are not quite there yet. Now, to the extent that you continue to nurture and publish and communicate with them, you will keep guiding them towards the visible pipeline. And to the extent that you stop, well, no one's buying, no one's calling. So I'm going to stop doing the things that nurture people in the invisible pipeline. Then you effectively starve your invisible pipeline. They never become visible.
Yeah. And so, I mean, practically, I think the question is, okay, what's the thing, right? How does it happen? How do I get myself into this place? And I know we sound like broken records here sometimes.
No,
but
never.
It's on purpose.
No, never. No,
never. Okay,
never
not you.
Ourselves.
Not you, but me. But I think, this is where we go back to the basics that we talk about all the time, right? Because this isn't about me thinking, okay, I remember Ahmed, he was that nice guy who does some kind of consulting somewhere, right? This is me saying, wait a minute, okay, Ahmed's the guy that I remember because he solves this very particular problem that I have as a consultant, because I, need a predictable pipeline. I don't have it. And he's the guy that's going to show me how to do that, right? Like, you want to be so connected to a particular problem that your specificity is critical, right? This is not a time just to be out there saying, hey, I'm a consultant, I do a lot of things, because nobody remembers that. And nobody, quite frankly, is going to take the time to parse that out. Even if there was something about you that was interesting, people are too busy and too focused on their own problems to, dig through what's great about you to find the thing that solves their problem. So critical to be cementing your name to a very particular niche. Again, something we talk about all the time, but in this context, important to repeat again.
Well, if you're someone who's been listening to the podcast or following content on LinkedIn or via email for a while, you can understand how this applies because you're participating in it. So again, if you're a relatively new listener or follower, then maybe this won't hold for you. But if you've been around for a while paying attention and you haven't worked with us yet, you're in the 95%, aren't you? You're not quite there. You're not quite ready. You're not quite in that position yet. But here's what I know from experience, that hopefully we've kind of lodged ourselves in your mind as an organization to at least talk to when I need to build pipeline. And so when you get to that stage, our name surfaces, you end up reaching out, book a call, we have a conversation, and then we see what happens from there. And I see this happen all the time. We get people that reach out and say, oh, I've been following for months or years, or I found you last year, been listening to the podcast or following on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. And, I wasn't ready then. All this stuff was happening. But now I'm ready. Now I have a need. Now I have now I'm at this unique point where I determined that your expertise, your offer, your solution might be relevant to me. What is that? That's a category entry point that we are positioned around, and that enables recall and retrieval.
And it explains why we sometimes repeat ourselves, right? Why we always repeat ourselves. And I say this because I think it can be freeing to someone who's out there, creating content or doing outreach. And there starts to become that uncomfortable feeling where they say, well, I've been saying the same thing over and over again. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, people are going to notice, they're going to keep hearing the same thing, and they're going to think I have nothing else to talk about. Exactly. Right? You want them to hear you talking about the same thing over and over again. First of all, because they're not paying that much attention, right? Like, nobody's seeing everything you put out into the world. So,
well, our people are. They pay attention.
Get over yourself, first of all. But
our people pay attention to everything that we say and listen to every episode and follow every word. So,
yeah.
But there,
as I was saying, get over yourself and recognize that, like, they're only going to get bits and pieces of it. But yes, you want them to hear the same thing over and over again, because that's how they know that that's the thing you think about, right? That's the thing that you spend your days agonizing over and figuring out and problem solving for. And that's the reason that your name will appear when that exact thing is on their mind.
Well, it's a really good point, right? Because I think, a lot of folks, when they're publishing, they try to be relevant to a large number of people forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
And that might be a good content strategy if you want to be an influencer of some sort, monetize your content, sure. But if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you don't want to be an influencer, become a full-time content creator. Your teenager probably does, right? But you might not want to do that. And so therefore, you're trying to be highly relevant to people at a point in time. And then, frankly, irrelevant to them after that point in time or outside of that point in time. And so that's kind of our strategy with this show, right? I don't really expect many of you to listen forever. I think there's a period in which you listen where it's highly relevant to you. And then you get to the point where you maybe solve the problem, you've worked with us or haven't, it doesn't matter, but you've solved the problem, it's no longer as relevant, and you might not be as active in consumption anymore. That's perfectly fine. We're optimizing around that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, really what we're saying is that you might be brilliant, you might be the best at what you do, but if nobody remembers, who cares? Right? And when you're talking about consulting, you're talking about a very, very particular moment in time, right? It's going to be a small buyer pool at a particular moment who really needs to trust you to make what feels like a big leap to them. And they really are going to be, using everything at their disposal to ensure they're making the right decision. And so reaching out to what they see as a recognized name, right? What they've implanted in their brain as someone who does this, right? Who is a recognized category, who is the Coke of their Coca-Cola of their particular area, that's going to give me the thing I need and want in this moment when I need and want it. That's the thing that's going to get you the calls, and that's the thing that's going to close you the deals.
Hopefully with less sugar, though.
Yes.